we're proud of the tradition which the Lay Clergy Institute represents, and we're especially glad that in this series we've had a day today, an educational series of presentations which have been outstanding, and our event this evening will certainly match that, I'm sure. The chair of the committee that has put this all together is Mr. Neil Pillar, and he will introduce our speaker this evening.
Thank you, Kurt. I too would like to extend my welcome to you this evening. It's delightful to see all of you turn out tonight. For your information, just a little background on the Lay Clergy Institute. The Lay Clergy Institute is a privately endowed institute within our church, which for approximately 30 years has been bringing nationally known speakers into the Longmont area to provide the community with an opportunity to discuss and inform issues of particular importance at that point in time in the life of the community. Some years we bring in laymen, some lay speakers, some years we bring in religious speakers. And this year, of course, we've brought in Brian McNaught, who is a lay speaker. The lay clergy has always been provided to the community as a gift. We see it as in that way, and we have never charged a fee for our presentations, and we will not charge a fee to you this evening. Recent lay clergy events that we have held have included the Ebenezer Baptist Church from Atlanta, Georgia, which is Martin Luther King's church, and they performed with our church choir last year in just a glorious weekend of music. Prior to that, we had Rabbi Harold Kushner, who is the author of a couple of books, several books, some of which are When Bad Things Happen to Good People and When All You've Ever Wanted Isn't Enough. And prior to that, we had Sister Helen Prejean, who is probably best known for her work as the author of Dead Man Walking, which was then made into a movie. We've also presented in the past noted authors Scott Peck, as well as Millard Fuller, who was the moving force behind the Habitat for Humanity movement. And prior to that, one of the most exciting weekends was Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who was one of the major proponents for the hospice movement. Even though there is no fee this evening, if any of you are moved to make a donation, there will be a collection plate at the back of the church, and all of those collections will go to a designated charity, which is GLSEN, which is the Lesbian Education Network, and so if you would like to make a contribution to that, the money will be donated exclusively to that fund. It will not be used to defray any of the expenses of this institute this evening. Since this church may be foreign to you, let me put you at ease. There are no hidden agendas here tonight. The doors will remain unlocked, and we plan no involuntary conversions nor immersions this evening. So we're solely here to provide you with education and information. Following Brian's presentation, there will be refreshments served in the library lounge, which is out the double doors to the left. And at that time, you're invited to enjoy a photo exhibit called Love Makes a Family, which is being displayed in the library lounge. We're very pleased to have this as a part of the Lay Clergy Weekend. This evening, we are very pleased to bring you Mr. Brian McNaught, and this is part 2 of the Institute for this weekend. As Kurt indicated, part 1 was a workshop all day today, which was just a wonderful experience. For those of you who are not well familiarized with Brian, he is the country's leading corporate diversity consultant dealing with gay issues in the workplace. He has spoken to hundreds of university audiences. He's a syndicated columnist. He's the author of 3 watershed books on gay issues, which include Now That I'm Out, What Do I Do?, Gay Issues in the Workplace, and On Being Gay. Those books are for sale in the library lounge at cost after the presentation this evening, and we will have people there to provide them to you should you be interested. In addition to those activities, Brian has produced or appeared in 5 critically acclaimed videos which are shown frequently on public broadcasting system. He has created and presents 2 corporate workshop seminars on gay issues to numerous national corporations, including Lucent Technology, Ford Motor Company, AT&T, DuPont, Hewlett-Packard, and Motorola, just to name a few. And he comes to us fresh off 2 days of work at Lucent Technologies on Thursday, and Hewlett-Packard in Loveland on Friday. So he has had a full weekend. But he is still invigorated and ready to present a wonderful presentation this evening. In addition to those activities, we learned today that he is also a captivating public speaker, and I'm sure you will not be sorry that you came this evening. So please welcome Mr. Brian McNaught.
Thank you very much. And thank you to the lay clergy committee of this wonderful church for bringing us here, bringing us together. Can we give them a round of applause? And let me tell you what I think is happening out there in terms of audience before I begin, because I like to sort of get an idea of who I'm speaking to. My guess is that we are all over the map in our comfort level with this issue, and maybe all over the map in our comfort level about doing this in a church. That we have people who perhaps couldn't come tonight because they couldn't become comfortable with the subject or with the meeting place. And that's why it's a wonderful place for us to be doing this. And that's why I think it's so important that you decided to not only have this talk, but we spent an incredible day today. 90 people showed up from all over the area to take a look at the issue of how do we create a safer space in our schools and in our churches and in our workplaces and in our homes for gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgendered people. And that's a remarkable thing to be happening in this area of the country at this time of our lives, and I thank and congratulate you on that. My guess is that we are in this audience heterosexual and homosexual, bisexual, and that we are male and female and on the continuum. My guess is that we are people who have left the church and who have come with perhaps a faint hope that this is an indication that the church might care about us in a way that we didn't imagine. And we're people who maybe have even come with reluctance and wanting us to know that they don't feel comfortable with this issue. And we welcome everybody tonight. My task is to talk about the journey. And my hope is that those of you who are lesbian and gay and bisexual and transgendered will make the journey with me. I know that I don't speak for everybody. I speak for me and the path that I have walked in these 51 years. But I hope that what you identify with my story, you'll sort of make your journey with me. And those of you who are heterosexual who know lots about this subject, I hope you make the journey with me too. And those of you who are heterosexual and who know nothing about the subject, I hope that you'll make the journey by thinking about the things in your own life that you've experienced that you can relate to me. Okay? So, the life of Brian. And why? I mean, why are we here in this church telling the life of Brian? Well, the United Church of Christ is deciding whether or not it's going to become an open and affirming congregation. And those words mean that we're going to make a special effort to reach out to the gay, lesbian, and bisexual community to let them know that not only are they welcome, but they are very, very welcome. And we know that they have suffered great pain in the world, and we want to make sure that they know that we care about them and that they will be taken good care of if they choose to come and be part of our community. But in order to do that, we sort of have to talk about who are gay people. And so I'm going to tell you a little bit about me and about my journey. And the title of my talk is The Gay Person's Journey, A Life Lived Deliberately, because my life has changed a lot since I first started doing these talks back in 1974. And I want to talk about the changes that have happened in my life. Two terms that I'm going to use tonight that I think I'd like to talk about before I begin my story are terms that you may be familiar with, but I'm going to give you my interpretation of the definitions. One is homophobia, and I know that you probably have heard that term before, although some people haven't. I have to tell you this, that I often get asked when I'm asked what I do for a living and I say I do training on homophobia, some people will say, is that the fear of leaving the house? And they're very serious about that. No, that's agoraphobia. Actually, the Census Bureau called me one time. Ray and I had filled out, Ray's my partner of 23 years. We had filled out the Census Bureau report, and this woman called and she said, "Mr. McNaught?" I said, "Yes." She said, "This is the Census Bureau, and we have a question about your profession." I said, "What is that?" "Well, it says you're your homophobia educator. Is that because you work with people who are afraid of leaving the house?" And I said, "No." I said, that's a fear of homosexuals." And there was this long silence. And, "Thank you very much." And I clicked. More than I needed to know, thank you. Let me say that I think the term is overused, and that anytime we overuse a term, it loses its meaning. When I use the term homophobic, I am not talking about people who are uncomfortable with this issue. If that were true, then enormous segments of the population would be homophobic, and the majority of the population is not. Large segments of the population are confused with good reason. No one's ever talked to them about the issue. When I work with corporate audiences, which is who I work with most often, I'll say to them, according to Gallup, less than 10% of us say we got a good sex education at home. Can I see the hands of those of you who feel you had a good sex education at home? In fact, why don't we do that together? How many people feel you got a good sex education when you were growing up? See, one or two of you. The rest of us, you know what we did when we were growing up? We watched you. And when you laughed, we laughed, because we didn't know what we were talking about. In my house, no one was pregnant. I had 6 siblings, right? But no one was pregnant in my house. They were in a family way. And you never asked, how did you get in a family? Go tell your father you asked me that question, Mother would say. And most of us didn't have any education in high school about sexuality, heterosexuality or homosexuality, certainly not homosexuality. In fact, Gallup said 15% of us had an education about sexuality in high school. How many people feel you got a good sex education in high school? Well, it's okay to put your hand up. And the Disney cartoon with the arrows counts. The fallopian tube. That's more than I got. We got a half-an-hour film from the Navy on gonorrhea. That was all they showed us. And I went to an all-boys Catholic prep school, and of course the impact was that we were all terrified of having sex, which I think was the intention of showing us the film. And how many of you, when growing up, had a book on homosexuality in your family library when you were growing up, right? You heard the words sissy, pansy, homo, queer, fairy, dyke, right? You heard it on the playground. Don't throw the ball like a sissy, son. But how many of you had a book that you could look up, what a sissy was? And did anybody have? So how are you supposed to understand this, right? Ignorance is the enemy. I really do believe this, that ignorance is the parent of fear, and fear is the parent of hatred. That we're afraid of what we don't understand, and we often hate what we're afraid of. Does that make sense? Have you ever been to a foreign country and not known the language? Have you had that experience, right? It's hands of everyone who's done that, right? And so what happens? It's time to order off the menu, and there's no English on the menu, and you have no idea what you're going to get. Have you had that experience? Or you don't understand the monetary system, and so you sort of hold these bills in your hand and hope that they'll not overcharge you? Have you done that before? Well, see, I think for a lot of people, homosexuality is a foreign language that they've never learned because no one ever taught them. And there was no one at home, there was no book that taught them about it. And so their fear level is pretty high because it's new. It's just new for them. And that when people are given the opportunity to learn new information, their fear level goes down. Did any of you come back to the States and then learn some words in the language of the country you had visited and then go back to the country? Wasn't your experience different? Like I learned poulet was chicken. That was good, right? So I could order poulet every time I went to a French restaurant. Well, I think when people start to learn a little bit of the language, their anxiety goes down. So when I say homophobia, I am not talking about people who are uncomfortable, because lots of people are uncomfortable because they have not learned the language. I'm talking about people who go out of their way to create a hostile environment for people. If somebody came tonight to disrupt, that would be homophobia. Okay? If somebody came to tonight feeling anxious because they didn't understand the topic, that's not homophobia. And homophobia does not mean that you have conservative religious values. A lot of people want to make dichotomies, don't they, between the homosexual community and the conservative religious community. There are a lot of people who identify themselves as conservative religious people who see themselves as allies on this issue. I've had lots of people come up to me in trainings in the corporate environment and say, you know, Brian, personally I feel that homosexual behavior is morally wrong, but I think telling an anti-gay joke is morally wrong. See, I wouldn't call that person homophobic, right? And we don't have to be best friends. All we have to do is work together in that environment. You know, you're not asking people to change their personal values at work when you say respect your colleagues. You're just saying treat people with professional respect. So homophobia doesn't mean that you have conservative religious values. It means that you go out of your way to create a hostile environment for people so that they don't feel safe telling you who they are. They don't feel safe telling you that they have a sister or a brother who's gay. That's homophobia. Okay, that's how I use it. And gay and lesbian and bisexual people grow up in a world that is homophobic, and we eat off that plate. People my age sort of remember the Clean Plate Club. You know, when you were growing up, you had to eat everything on your plate because, you know, food was valuable and there were children in China starving, and so you ate everything. Well, we were fed a lot of information about homosexuality too, and those of us who were gay, lesbian, bisexual growing up ate from that plate, and so we ingested that information. And a lot of us grew up with homophobic feelings about other people who were gay and about ourselves. Okay, so it can be internalized too. The other word is heterosexism, and this is the word that I think we should be using more commonly than we do. Heterosexism is two things. Most of us know it as an assumption of heterosexuality, don't we? I mean, that's what we think it is, that people make jokes because they think that there's no gay people around. That's, you know, what do we think of when we think of we're going to find a homosexual? If we're looking for somebody gay in our culture, we're looking for either a masculine-looking woman or a feminine-looking man. Those are our stereotypes in our movies, right? Right? And I'm suggesting to you that some stereotypes work, but most don't, and that you really can't pick out gay, lesbian. I'm very good at that. I'm very good at picking out gay people. I tell my corporate audiences this. I say, I'm very good, and I'm about to do it. See? Right? So let me see here. And you know what happens? The anxiety is way up. You know why? Because I say, you know as well as I do that if I pick you out as gay, 30 years from now, they're still going to be saying, that's the guy the gay guy picked out 30 years ago. And you know that your life will change. You know that if you're male and I point you out, that other men won't walk into the restroom with the same level of comfort that they did before I pointed you out. And people nod their head, yes, they believe that. And I say, and if you don't believe that, your homework assignment is to go buy one of my books, right? And the next time you're on public transportation, pull the book out. And they start to squirm. What's the matter? Oh, you know that if you're reading the book and you look over on the airplane and see that he's reading it, what do you assume about him? That he's gay, yeah. You know how cramped those airplanes are, you know? You know what will happen if you put your elbow on the armrest the same time that, if it was a he, put his elbow, if with a woman it's different, but if you were a man sitting next to him, you know what happens? You get a lot of room on an airplane when you pull out a gay book. You ever get stuck in the center seat? Take a gay book along. It's amazing. It's amazing what happens. People make room for you. Right? Now, why is that? Because there's an assumption that you're interested in me. There's lots of stereotypes that we have of gay people. Oh, if he's gay or she's gay, people think they chose it, right? That was one of the big ones. Or she wishes she was a man, or he wishes that he was a woman. Now, see, the reason they think this is that no one ever educated them, remember? And I didn't get the education either. I grew up in a house without any information. These were the myths that were floating around, and I didn't know whether they were true for other people. They didn't feel true for me, but I didn't know about other homosexuals if it weren't true. Were they promiscuous, right? Could they ever settle down with one person? Because that was what I heard. That was what was fed to me, right? That's heterosexism, the assumption that everybody is heterosexual, and if they're not, they have all these characteristics. Now, how does heterosexism in that form work? Well, 90% of the gay employees at one particular factory that I worked in report having been told an anti-gay joke by people who thought that they were heterosexual. Asking a gay person, are you married, is a heterosexist assumption, right? Now, Ray and I have been together 23 years. I can't legally marry, right? So what am I supposed to say? Am I married? Yes, no, right? If I say no, they think what? I haven't found the right person of the other gender yet, and I have a perfect person for you, they say, right? So I get carried into a conversation I don't want to be in, right? So I usually have to say I'm gay. Well, why do you have to tell me that? Because you asked, you know. Don't you get that? These two friends just were visiting us in Florida. Ray and I just moved to Florida, and these friends were visiting. They said they had just been on a cruise, and these two gay men who were partners took one of their fathers and his wife and a brother along on the cruise. They paid for this cruise. And this woman on the cruise, this wealthy woman, they said, came up to them and said, now, you'll have to explain this to me. I just don't get it. Who are you all? And this one gay friend, feeling like he didn't want to have to cause problems for his family, said, well, this is my friend, and this is my father, and this is my stepmother, and this is my brother. Oh, that's your friend, okay. The next day, the woman came up to the father and said, you have to explain this to me. Who is everybody again? Now, she's on a fishing expedition, isn't she? Right? And so after the third time of being asked, one of the gay men put his arms around the other and said, this is my partner of 12 years. And the woman looked shocked. Well, why did you need to bring that up, she said. Because you kept asking. Heterosexism assumes heterosexuality. So we're clear about that, right? But it's more than that. And this is the part that I think we miss. Heterosexism is a value system. Sexism is a value system. You're familiar with that, right? Sexism says that it is superior to be male than it is to be female. In its most common form, right? Big boys don't cry. Little girls cry. We've already got a standard for that little boy, don't we, about big boys and little girls, right? Get away from the bathroom. Your sister preens in front of the mirror. You should not be doing that. Big boys don't do that. Little girls do that. So now we have a standard that there are big boys and little girls, and that it is better to be male than it is to be female. Why else do we admire Cindy Crawford for wearing men's boxer shorts, right? Fashion statement. But if Richard Gere wore women's underpants, he's a cross-dresser. Why? What's the difference, right? One is stepping up, one is stepping down. Okay. Racism, as you know, is an attitude that it is superior to be one race, right? All of my history books when I was growing up were filled with pictures of white people doing important things, right? Now, I don't think that the people who decided which pictures went in the book were consciously racist. Have you ever heard of unconscious incompetence? That people do things in an unconsciously incompetent way, and then if you point something out to them, then they have the choice of either maintaining their incompetence, then they're consciously incompetent, or they can become consciously competent. They can work on those issues. I don't think the people who put just the pictures of white people were intentionally racist, but they were racist. And so I grew up thinking, well, the important things were done just by white people. And that's really what the message has been. And that is racism. So it says it is better to be white than it is any other color. All right, now racism can work in different directions too, but that's the most prominent form. Heterosexism is the same. Heterosexism says very clearly, it is better to be heterosexual than it is to be homosexual. In fact, it is God's intention. It is nature's intention. Heterosexuality is nature's intention. Now, listen, you're entitled to believe that. But if you do believe it, everything you do in response to this issue will represent that bias, right? In this instance, if you are heterosexist, then we are tolerating gay people. We're not valuing gay people. See, in the corporate setting, they talk about valuing diversity. Have you heard that term before? We value diversity. We don't tolerate diversity. And what they mean when they say we value diversity, and the reason they value diversity today is that the corporate setting is very different than it ever was before. Competition is enormous, as you must know, across the country. Every one of us wants our stock prices to go up, right? And so we want the companies that we own stock in to be very competitive and to make all kinds of important decisions that keep costs low and keep everyone working competitively. Well, that means that everyone who's working for this company has to work better than the people who work for this company, because we got the same products, basically, which means that everyone who works for this company really has to feel like we're going to treat them equally. Well, the people who work for this company today are not just white men anymore, who are Christian and who are heterosexual. The people that we look at this company, they're black, and they're brown, and they're red, and they're yellow, and they're white, right? And they are disabled, and they are not disabled, and they are men and women, and they're older workers and younger workers, and they're gay and they're straight, right? And we're working real hard to create in them a sense that they are going to be valued. We value all of you. So what we're really saying is that you bring something special to the table that I don't bring because you're female. I'm not tolerating you as a woman, I'm valuing you. Do you understand the distinction we're making? And that as a female, you've made a journey that I haven't made. The person of color has made a journey that I as a white person haven't made. So what skills did you pick up on that journey? What special gifts do you have because you are so unique? And if that is all true, then the gay, lesbian, or bisexual person, because of his or her journey, also has a special gift to bring to the table. That if you do not honor the gift, and the competition does, the competition has the competitive edge, because they're working to make sure that everybody around their table has their gift appreciated. And not only will the competition have the competitive edge in terms of working as a team, but I might decide to go work for the competition because you're not valuing my contribution. Does that make sense? Well, corporations today are beginning to understand that. That's why they bring in people like me to help heterosexual people who don't understand this issue better understand it, so that gay, lesbian, and bisexual people feel more comfortable coming forward and offering their gifts. Right? But if you're heterosexist, you're not going to value the contribution of a gay person. Right? And gay and lesbian people can be heterosexist too. And the story that I want to tell you about in my journey is really a story about heterosexism challenged. The belief that there is something wrong about me, right? That I, once I accepted myself as gay, still thought of myself as less than. Let me tell you the story. A few years ago, I was asked by a national Catholic magazine to address the issue, are gay people part of God's plan? Legitimate question, right? Let's take a look at it. Does God have a plan? And if so, what does God have in mind in having gay people? And I wrote that when I die, I imagine that God will say to me, as I believe God will say to each person here, Brian, or Karen, Susan, whatever your name is, did you sing the song I taught you? Simple question. And my response was, no, God. For the first 26 years, I did not. I was too afraid. The song that I sang in my life growing up as the middle child of 7 Irish Catholics with 16 years of parochial education, senior class president, fraternity member, basketball team member, editor of my university yearbook is, I am Brian, I am heterosexual. Because I was so afraid that if I sang my song, I would never have been elected class president. I never would have been allowed on the basketball team. I never would have been allowed to be an altar boy. I never would have been allowed to be a patrol boy. Right? They never would have allowed me in the fraternity, and you all know that that's the truth. Right? I grew up at a very early age knowing that I had same-sex feelings. In fact, you know, if you had been my family members and friends when I was growing up, there were 2 secrets I wouldn't have told you. I had two big secrets. First secret was that for as long as I can remember, I have always been aware of same-sex feelings. Now, 11 is the mean age of recognition for all of us. Everyone in this room, according to social scientists, was probably aware of who we were attracted to at age 11. Now, I'm not talking about genital thoughts, I'm talking about romantic thoughts. You don't have genital thoughts until you go through, you're in puberty. But most of us, if I asked you who your first crush was on, most of you could tell me, right? I always had crushes on or attractions to men. Now, I wasn't comfortable with those feelings. I didn't encourage those feelings. In fact, the exact opposite. Sensing from the culture that what I was feeling was inappropriate, I fought my feelings constantly, right? Because I sensed that if I allowed myself to feel these feelings, I would become this awful thing that people made fun of. Homo, queer, fairy, sissy, pansy. So I knew instinctively that no matter what, even though I didn't understand what I felt, I mustn't tell anybody. Does that sound familiar to anybody? Okay. See, I say to audiences that the horror of gay, lesbian, or bisexual, and I'm going to add transgendered, is the horror of having a secret that you don't understand. How are you supposed to understand the secret when there's no book on the shelf at home that explains it? There's no teacher at school that will talk about it. Right? You're terrified of even thinking about taking a book out of the public library. Where would you hide it? Under your mattress? That would explain to you why you were having these feelings of attraction. So it's a secret that you don't understand, and that you know instinctively don't tell anybody about, because if you tell them about it, they won't love you anymore. And that's why most gay, lesbian, and bisexual people that I know who grew up with an awareness of same-sex feelings always felt that when their parents told them that they loved them, what they would say to themselves would be, "Would you if you knew?" Or when a teacher would pull them out for praise, "We're so proud of you, would you if you knew?" Not that I've done anything. I didn't have sex until much later in my life. But the very fact that I felt something disqualified me from your love, disqualified me from your praise. And I never, ever trusted, and I was this super achiever. Now, the second secret I couldn't have shared with you when I was growing up was what I wanted to be when I grew up. Do you remember that when you were kids, sitting around talking about what you wanted to be? Firefighter, priest, right? I wanted to be a saint. But who tells your friends that, right? See, in the Catholic Church, a saint was the best. You had to die, but that didn't matter. As far as, who cares, A saint, God's best friend, right? And when I was little, that was easy, right? I was one of those kids who went to church every day. Because in Catholic schools, we went to Mass before we went to school. And I went to Mass every day. And I loved it. And I went to communion every day. And on Saturday, I went to confession. Every Saturday, I went to confession. And in the Catholic Church, you make your first confession in second grade, so you're like 8 years old. And my mom one Saturday said, "Honey, we're not going to go to church today. I've got other things to do." "Mom, I need to go to confession." She said, "Brian, you're 8. What are you doing?" I wasn't doing anything. I used to make stuff up, I'd go into confession and say, "Bless me, Father, I missed Mass on Sunday." And after a while, they'd recognize your voice, say. And he'd say, "I saw you with your parents." "Oh, well, I lied." "Yes, you did, and I'll forgive you." Now, why did I do that? Why did I do that? Why did I go to church all the time? Because I felt safe in church. Isn't that crazy? As a little kid, struggling with this issue, it was the one place that I felt safe. If I could go in church, and maybe some of you can remember this experience before some of us felt pretty traumatized by the church. But when I was a little kid and I would go in and be quiet, and I'd look at the stained glass windows and the light be coming through it, and I'd smell the incense and see the candles flickering, and I'd feel that I was in the presence of a loving parent, because the church did a good job describing God as a loving parent to me. And I felt safe. I thought, even though you're struggling with these feelings that you are sensing are inappropriate, right? Because people are using words like fag and homo and sissy and pansy and fairy and abomination. Even though you're hearing those words out there, in here you're feeling like if it's just you and God, you're okay. Right? And my journey really was for many years trying to bring those two secrets together in some sort of safe identity. Not being able to tell anyone with any sense of confidence about my sexual feelings because I didn't completely understand them. I just knew that I didn't feel what my heterosexual friends did. There wasn't like there was any gay identity, there were no gay books. Today we had in this wonderful workshop that we did today, they had a video that CBS did in 1967 on the homosexual. And it was pretty scary stuff. I'm glad that CBS did it when they did it, and I wish I had seen it. I didn't see it, and it might have made a difference for me, but when you look at it 30 years later, you think, oh my Lord, what things they were saying. But even longer before that, there was no one for most of us to look at. I mean, I know that today we got Will and Grace, we got all kinds of things for people to look at. There was nothing when I was growing up. All I knew was what I wasn't, right? I wasn't what my friends were. Do you remember the Mickey Mouse Club, any of you near my age? You know, we'd come home from school and the boys would watch together. And those of you who are too young for this, I apologize for the reference, but I'll explain it. Mickey Mouse was this program by Walt Disney, see, and they had kids our age that were Mouseketeers. It was a simpler time, you have to remember that. And they would come out, and the girls would come out in their little pleated skirts and their mouse sweatshirts and their mouse ears, and the boys had slacks and this mouse sweatshirt. And there was one female Mouseketeer that was the sexual barometer of the 50s, and her name was, see that? No matter where I go in the United States, everybody knows Annette. And the guys would watch together, and Annette would come out, and they'd go, Annette, 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 you know, as if she could see us, you know, fighting for her attention. And I would be going, Annette, 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 Annette. I was the only one in the room who didn't know why I was doing it. But I knew enough to do it, see. And when I speak to just a lesbian and gay bisexual audience, I'll say to them, it was like learning heterosexual, wasn't it? I mean, you were growing up not being able to tell anybody who you were, but when your mom or dad said to you, are you looking forward to going to the prom, son? Or are you looking forward to going to the prom, honey? You said, oh, I sure am. I didn't want to go to the prom. I mean, I loved the girl that I dated, and I incidentally, and a lot of people don't understand this, I had girlfriends from kindergarten on. One of these stupid myths that gay men hate women and lesbian women hate men, that is so stupid. I love women. I've had girlfriends for as long as I can remember. I just never had any erotic feelings for them. There was just nothing happened. I tried, You know what my sex education was? My father left a Playboy magazine in my brother's in my bedroom. But it didn't work because we thought he was hiding it from Mother. We did. We thought, oh, look what Dad's doing. We should protect him, right? All of our friends were just as jealous as they could be because we had this Playboy magazine, see. So I'd watch my friends look at this magazine. I thought, well, that's what you're supposed to do. So I'd look at this magazine thing. All right, the light's going to go on any minute. I'm going to have this reaction. Of course, once you have the reaction, then everything's wonderful, isn't it? Because then you get the prizes. What do you get? Oh, gosh, you get your parents loving you, and you never have to question whether they do or they don't because you're heterosexual now. And the church is going to love you, and you're never going to get teased in the locker room. No one's ever going to guess your secrets. You're never going to get beaten up. You're never going to get fired. No one's going to throw a brick through your window. Wow. There are going to be Hallmark cards for you. Wow. Songs on the radio you can listen to and identify with. Right? You can go to Love Story and other love movies and cry with everybody else instead of thinking, where's me up here? Do you understand what I'm saying? That's great stuff if you could only have that, I thought. A talk show host one time asked me, he said, if I could give you a pill that would turn you heterosexual, would you take it? I said, no, I've worked too hard to be who I am. I said, but if you had offered it to me when I was 10, I would have. Or 11, or 12, or 13, or 14, all those years that I was so frightened of my feelings, I would have taken it. See, I was a real heterosexist kid because I really did believe that God was heterosexual, right? And every person in authority was heterosexual, and then there were those awful homosexuals that were discussed in jokes and graffiti, and then there was me, and I wasn't quite sure what I was, but I wasn't like those awful people, and I wasn't quite as good as those good people who were heterosexual. Right? So when you ask the question, did you sing the song I taught you? No, I didn't. When I was a high school senior, the guidance counselor came into our classroom. I was in the honors class, and he said, if any of you guys come in and tell me you've screwed a chick, I'll talk. You tell me you're queer, I'll kick you out of my office. This is a man with his master's in guidance and counseling in 1966. I was sure he was talking about me.
What did you say?
He said, if any of you guys come into he's the guidance counselor, come into my office and tell me that you have screwed a chick, that was his terminology, a chick, I'll talk to you. If you tell me you're queer, I will kick you out of my office. So, who am I supposed to talk to? See, that's the issue, is who do you talk to? I talk about psychological homelessness. I talk about gay, lesbian, and bisexual people being psychologically homeless. Where do we belong? In what school, and what gymnasium, and what church, and what family? Where do we really trust that we lay our head in peace, and that we are understood, and that we are wanted? And you don't trust that you belong anywhere because you're so afraid that at some point it's going to come out, right? And you're going to lose everything. I graduated from high school in 1966, and the faculty unanimously voted me the highest honor the school had to offer, the John Stewart Christian Leadership Award. John was a boy who died in our school in an automobile accident, and his parents gave money and said, please honor one senior a year, and I was the choice of the faculty. And my name was put on a big plaque outside of the principal's office, and they gave me a small version of the plaque, and I said to myself when I got the award, what did I say? They would never give you this if they knew. Not that I had ever had sex, right? There's no sinner here. There's no sin. See, there's just even in the minds of traditionally oriented people, I haven't done anything. No, I've done nothing. Just had feelings that I thought, but nevertheless, I knew that they would never give me the award, and you probably know that too. 8 years later, when I came out publicly, my name was taken off the plaque in the high school. Now, there was one teacher that I'm told about. And I write this story in my new book now that I'm out. What do I do? There was one teacher who, with his own money, went out and he had a new name tag made up. This is back in 1974. This is early for some bold heterosexual teacher to have enough confidence. He was a track coach in himself to go do this. And he screwed my name back into the plaque. It was taken down again. And he said, I have enough money to keep doing this. And he went out and he had another one made up, and it was left up there. Now, what he did, as far as I'm concerned, is give evidence to Edmund Burke's challenge to all of us. Edmund Burke was the English philosopher who said, all that must happen for evil to triumph is that good people sit by and do nothing. And Bob Stark, the track coach, said he's not going to sit by and watch this drama unfold. Now, of the 900 boys in my school, 90 of them, I would suggest to you, are struggling with their sexual orientation. Who do you think they might be more inclined to go talk to? The guidance counselor or the track coach? See, it's not our title that determines the confidence people have in us, is it? It's our music. It's what they pick up from our behaviors that tells them. Often a parent will say, why'd you tell your Aunt Margaret that you were gay instead of me? Because I knew Aunt Margaret loved me, and there was nothing I could tell Aunt Margaret that would stop her from loving me. And I wasn't quite sure about you. I mean, you can't say that. You don't want to hurt their feelings, but that's why you talk to Aunt Margaret, right? And maybe that's why you went to the other church and not to the one that your parents went to, because maybe you thought that church was going to be more welcoming to you than your own parents' church. You hated to leave it because that's what you grew up in, right? But it's the place that you felt safe. I went to college to get my degree in journalism, dating still all along the way, because I'm still hoping that maybe one day, I'll have these feelings and my life will change. And in college, my definition of sainthood changed a third time. The second time, my definition of change, when I was a little kid, a saint was a perfect person. In high school, the brothers said, a saint is a sinner who tries. And I thought, thank you, that is a lot easier. That I can work on. In college, I heard a wonderful definition in theology class. It's an apocryphal story, which means it probably didn't happen, but it's a good story anyway. The priest was quizzing the first graders about religion to see if the sister had done a good job, and said, who can tell me what a saint is? A little boy in the back of the room raised. Timmy? Timmy said, a saint's that thing in the church that the light shines through. And I thought, wow. Out of the mouth of babes. What a great definition. And that became my definition, right? That's what I wanted to be in the world, was a source of light. And so how do you do that, though? Here you are having these feelings that you still have not acknowledged to anybody, not even yourself. At the end of my junior year in college, I said to myself, okay, Brian, you don't know anybody who's homosexual. You've never read a book, right? This is 1969. You've never been to a bar, right? But you know what you are. So quit fighting it. And I did. I quit fighting it. I quit dating. And no one was ever going to know my secret. So no, God, I did not sing the song you taught me. When I graduated from college, I was hired by the Catholic newspaper of the Archdiocese of Detroit to be a reporter and a columnist and ultimately a talk show host. This is a time of enormous national turmoil. Remember the 70s, the Vietnam War, the bombings in Cambodia, the boycotting of non-union lettuce and grapes. Do you remember that? And how we were fighting with each other across the dinner table with our parents. You know, kids and parents were often divided. We drove our Beetles with bumper stickers that said, "Don't trust anyone over 30. Do you remember those days? Well, all of the churches at the time were trying to create a sense of legitimacy with young people, because young people were leaving the churches, and I was the Catholic Church in Detroit's bridge because I had been involved in all the civil rights struggles and I was still a daily communicant. And so that's why I was writing these columns, and my column won a couple national awards in Catholic press competition, and I started getting invited to be the speaker at senior citizen luncheons and father-daughter communion breakfasts, and no one knew who I was because I was too afraid. See, because my feeling was that what I was not okay. I tolerated who I was, but I did not affirm who I was, and there's a big difference. So I could say beautiful things that would inspire you to love yourself, but I was not able to do the same for me. And the voice said that to me. Tell them that you're gay. No. Why not? Because I'll get fired, and I'll lose my family, and I'll lose my job, and I don't want to do it. But Brian, you're telling everybody else to love themselves. Why don't you love yourself enough to tell them who you are? You're telling them, blessed are they who suffer persecution for justice' sake. What about you? Leave me alone. You know that voice that won't leave you alone? And it gnawed at me, and it gnawed at me, and it gnawed at me, and nobody knew my story. And I didn't know what to do. And so one Saturday morning, I went to the broom closet of my home, and I drank a bottle of turpentine. And then I went into the bathroom, and I took every pill in the medicine cabinet. And I went into the kitchen of my home, and I sat down, and I waited to die. And you know what? I was ready. I was 26 years old, and I had had enough. I get a lot of mail, and I get a lot of mail from people who tell me about their isolation and their pain, and they're contemplating suicide, and I understand it. When I moved to Atlanta, Georgia, when Ray and I moved to Atlanta, one of the first things I did was to go see Dr. King's burial site. And on the side of his tomb, anyone know what's on the side of his tomb? Can anyone tell me? Free at last. Free at last. Thank God Almighty that I'm free at last. And that's how I felt. I was free at last. I did not have to spend one more day worrying about people approving of me. And I know people in my church would say, but Brian, if you kill yourself, you go to hell. It's a mortal sin. I didn't believe that. I believed that what would happen would be that I would wake up in the arms of God, and that God would say to me, I am so sorry. It was not supposed to be like that. See, I don't think it's supposed to be like this. I think we create havoc in each other's lives out of our fear of each other, out of our ignorance. We poison each other's food, and then we eat this food, and we walk around afraid of each other. And I thought, I'm tired of it, and I don't want any more of it. And then I thought about my mother and my father, and the fact that of their 7 children, they had already lost 2, and that it would kill them to lose me without knowing why. And so more for them than for anybody else, I got dressed, and I drove myself to the local Catholic hospital. I walked in. They said, McNaught, what are you doing here? I told them what I did. They ran me into the emergency room. They put a tube down my nose and my throat, and they pumped my stomach. And as I sat on that table at age 26 crying, I swore to myself that I was never again going to live my life based on people's images or expectations of me. If you don't love Brian, who's gay, you don't love Brian. And I will never again, I promised myself, question whether or not someone loves me, because they will always know the truth. So the song, changed. Did you sing the song I taught you? Well, yes, Scott, I did. I am Brian. I am gay. Won't you accept me today? Became my song. So here I am, 26 years old. I come out, tell my mom and my dad, not that I attempted suicide, but that I was gay. My mother wept. She said, the world's going to be awful to you and there's nothing I can do about it. My father said, I think you've got a hormone imbalance and you'll outgrow it. That was his best shot. Dad didn't get any of this education, you know. Dad did better than Ray's dad. Ray was studying to be a Holy Cross priest at Notre Dame University. He came home, told his mom and dad he was gay, and he was ordered out of the house and disowned on the spot. Now, they since reconciled, but what happened to Ray reinforces what all of us suspected would happen to us. I love you if you're heterosexual. But if you're not heterosexual, I don't love you anymore, and you're no longer my son, and why are you doing this to me? Right? So, I went out, I came to work, I told people one by one, I took them out to lunch, my boss, then the woman's editor, then the news editor. By Friday, I'd hit the whole staff. I told them all that I was gay. Why did I need to tell them? Sometimes, have you heard people say that? Why do you need to tell me this? My father said this actually when I came out, because when I came out, I ended up coming out in the New York Times because I lost my job and there was a lot of press about it. He said, why do you have to tell people what you do in bed? I don't tell people what I do in bed with your mother. Why do you have to tell people what you do in bed? Have you heard that before? People think that when I say I'm gay, I'm telling you what I do in bed. I'm not telling you anything. You don't even know if I'm having sex, right? I can never have sex my whole life and still be gay, right? I'm just telling you who I am, not what I do, right? It's not a lifestyle, it's a life, right? All right? So, well, it's true. So, I took everyone out to work and I wanted them to know who I was because I didn't want them to ever tell a joke again about gay people and not know they were hurting somebody that they loved. And they were all wonderful about it. And then the religion editor of the Detroit News called me and she said, Brian, I'm doing a story on homosexuality and religion and I understand that you've started the Detroit chapter of Dignity, which is a gay Catholic group. Would you consent to be interviewed? And I said, yes. And so Saturday there was this big story about Brian who's gay and Catholic, and on Monday my newspaper dropped my column because they had heard from advertisers over the weekend that we're going to drop our advertising if you don't do something about him. And so they dropped my column. And incidentally, the same thing happened at AT&T. I should tell you that because this is a different story. AT&T was one of my biggest clients, and now Lucent Technologies is one of my biggest clients. And when I was doing training at AT&T, James Dobson took one of my videos that I have out, and he played it over his radio program, and he encouraged his listeners to call AT&T and threaten to cancel the Universal card and to switch to Sprint if they didn't cancel this course. And to also stop the gay and lesbian group from organizing at AT&T. And they got thousands of phone calls. And AT&T said to them, what we are endorsing is professional respect at work. You think we're endorsing a lifestyle. What we're endorsing is professional respect at work, so we stand behind our programs, which I thought was great. Well, my newspaper didn't have the wherewithal. They did the best they could. I always believe people are doing the best they can, but that doesn't mean they can't do better, right? So my newspaper did the best they could, but they dropped my column. The reporter called me. She said, has there been any reaction to my article? I said, yes, they've dropped my column. Well, the next day, the Detroit News had an 8-column headline, Catholic newspaper drops column by homosexual. The New York Times picked it up, and all the radio and television stations in Michigan picked it up. And I was no longer Brian McNaught. It was amazing. I was the homosexual. I was the homosexual militant. I was a homosexual activist. I was a homosexual activist with an agenda. All these things suddenly happened to me because I came out at work, right? Well, you know what happened as a result? We had pandemonium. We had death threats. My folks got death threats. I got death threats at home. There were people picketing outside of the newspaper. It was awful. I didn't know what to do because the whole place had fallen apart. So I went on Dick Gregory's hunger fast. You know who Dick Gregory is? Cesar Chavez I was a real child of the 60s, and Chavez had been on his fast, and Dr. King has been on his fast, so I went on his fast, and I said I wasn't going to eat any food or drink any liquid until the church pledged to educate. And on the 17th day that I was on water, the bishop said, if you will stop your fast, we will work to educate the clergy. I ended my fast, and they fired me. Now, these are good people. They did the best they could, but they fired me. And that began this journey of mine, of coming to colleges or church groups. I didn't send out a flyer. I just started getting invited. Will you come and tell us what happened to you? Will you tell us your story? The first group, I told some people this morning, the first group I was ever invited to speak to, this is in '74, was a Bible study group in Detroit. And the woman who greeted me at the door said, this was a private home, we're glad you're here, but the lady in the green blazer says she's going to throw up when you walk in the room. And of course, I was dressed perfectly because, see, you need to know this. I had been the best little boy in the world before I came out, and now I was going to be the best little homosexual in the world, see. And this is really the crux of what I want to talk about. That once I came out, my feeling was that I am gay, but my life really needs to be about you accepting me. And if I can be fast enough on my feet with Scripture, and if I can be holy enough in my private life, and if I can be masculine enough in my presentation of myself, and if I can defy enough of your stereotypes, and if I can be really polite, right, then maybe you'll make room for me. Huh? And we do that. We become superachievers as homosexuals, hoping to be accommodated, right? And that's heterosexism. And we say to ourselves, I won't go to my high school reunion because that would make people uncomfortable. I won't ask that Ray be photographed with the family at the wedding because it'll ruin the wedding. Does this sound familiar? I won't ask for things because they're really being good by inviting us over. And I don't want to push the envelope. Right? Heterosexual people who accept me are extraordinary human beings and should be honored as such. I'm telling you what I was feeling. I am Brian. I am gay. Won't you accept me today? And that really was what my journey was about. Make them laugh, right? Have them really understand that they've been confused because you're so perfect. And you know how I knew I was heterosexist also? Is that if Donahue was on, Phil Donahue used to be a talk show host for those of you who don't remember, but he was one of the early pioneers who had gay people on, and if a gay person came on who satisfies people's stereotypes, I'd be at home pulling my hair out thinking, oh my God, why'd they pick you to be on television? Everyone's going to think that I look like you now, right? I work so hard at defying people's stereotypes, and they invite you, and suddenly we're going to be set back years. Or the television or newspaper would photograph those who were in drag at our parades. I think, oh, shoot, next time I'm going to run in front of the camera, I've never been photographed, incidentally, in 20-some years of going to marches. I've not once been photographed. And you know what? I used to personalize this. I used to really get angry at the media, and I used to think they were homophobic. Why do they always take pictures of the most outrageous elements of the march? I thought they were doing this on purpose. Until I started looking at other coverage, like football stadiums, and they'd have a person with a wedge of cheese on their head. I think, well, now I know not everyone in the stadium has a wedge of cheese, right? They always take a look at the unusual, right? Mardi Gras, St. Patrick's Day parade, not everyone has dyed themselves green, and is walking down the street. So maybe you should not be so quick to assume that they're doing this just to hurt you. But my heterosexism, my valuing of heterosexual people, and my devaluing of who I was, right, made me keep buying into this. And in addition, I found myself on an emotional roller coaster. I was very reactive on my journey. I found that if I was reading the paper and it said that the Bishop of Rochester has come out with a statement supporting gay rights, I would be euphoric that day. The church is moving, I'm accepted, and I'd be up. And then if the next day I'd read that the Bishop of Syracuse criticized the Bishop of Rochester because homosexuality is immoral, I would be deflated. I was up and down and up and down. Every time a heterosexual said something, I was up and down because that was the barometer for how I was supposed to feel about me. right? So if Ray got invited for Thanksgiving dinner, I would be, now Thanksgiving means something because the family is together, without thinking that I might be able to create my own family. Right? All that mattered was that the church accept me, and that my relatives accept me, and that my audiences accept me. You know, when Ray and I were together for 6 years, and I had heard, whether it was true or not, it was popular at the time that the average years together for heterosexual marriage was 6, you know, that 40% of marriages ended in divorce. So heterosexuals were traditionally 6 years together, and we were like 6 years in a day, and my attitude was, ha, 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 ha. We beat you. Instead of finding value in my relationship in and of itself, I was comparing it to another standard that wasn't my standard. That was my heterosexism. It was my valuing. And I did this all over the map. And I found that my spirituality was reactive. Right? My love was reactive. My sense of self was reactive as opposed to proactive. I would get into enormous biblical debates with people. I was ready for them, right? Give me your best shot, you know, because I knew my stuff, right? And I almost wanted them, you know, because I thought, you're not going to win this one, and I'm going to wow you, you know, and I'm going to win this one for gay people. But it was because I needed to convince that person, because if that one person liked me and accepted me, then I was okay. And I think I wasn't the only one doing this. And I think that gay people aren't the only people who do this. I think people of color go through this awful stage of internalized racism, and that women can go through this awful stage of internalized sexism, of not using their own standard to value themselves, but to look for approval outside of their gender for how they're presenting themselves and what they're achieving. And then I got a little ornery. Gay and lesbian people go through stages, say. And one of the stages that we go through is called identity pride. And in identity pride, the world is divided between us and them. Us is good, them is not. Say. It's a reaction to heterosexism where you say, not only are you not the best, you're the worst. Right? If you're heterosexual, you don't know anything about anything. Right? It's still very reactive. So I'm going to go buy my K.D. Lang music, and I'm going to put the rainbow flag on the back. All of this stuff is important stuff. I want to say this. I'm not putting it down. But I isolate. I'll go to gay restaurants, and I'll go to gay vacation places, and I'll have gay stuff all over my house, and the only people I really trust are gay people. Right? And I'm very suspicious of you if you're heterosexual. I'm going to go out and still try to win your support, but I don't trust you. Right? Does this sound familiar to some people? Okay. Now, what happens with that worldview, though, is that eventually a heterosexual person breaks through it and shakes up your paradigm. For instance, I was on a plane one time, and there was a nun sitting next to me in habit, and this was at a time in which I was particularly angry at the Catholic Church. So I thought, okay, I'm going to pull out my book. So I pulled out my book on being gay. Now, I wrote the book. I didn't need to read it, but I pulled it out. It says gay. And you know, when you're trying to make a point like this, you sort of are wasting lots of time because you keep, are they looking? Are they uncomfortable? So we land the plane, I put my book in the briefcase, and I'm getting out, and I really haven't made much eye contact with the person, and she taps me on the shoulder, and she passes me a note that says, God bless you, I support what you're doing. Say, wait a second. You're not supposed to say that. See, you're supposed to be this fire-breathing, Bible-quoting, homophobic person because you're a representative of the church that has been beating me up, I'm thinking. But she didn't fit my stereotype, which made me question my paradigm. I'm on my way to do a training at the University of Vermont, and the student who is driving me from the airport, the car breaks down. And a police officer stops and starts yelling at us because our car is blocking traffic on an expressway in a snowstorm. And he says, we're going to tow your car. You go up to the gas station up there and call for a ride. And I look at him and I say, I'm speaking at the university tonight, and if you're going to tow the car, I need to get my luggage and my briefcase. He said, get in the back of the squad car. So I'm in the back of the squad car, and this police officer is in front of me, and I'm behind this metal grate, and we're sitting there in the snowstorm with a windshield wiper going back and forth, and he turns to me and he says, so what are you talking about tonight? And one voice is saying, don't tell him, just make something up, And the other voice says, you tell him what you're doing. Don't you be afraid of him. So I said, I'm speaking on homophobia, hoping he'll think it's fear of leaving the house. And he says, that's a fear of homosexuals, isn't it? I said, yeah, it is. He said, well, I got rid of that years ago. I said, how? He said, well, our next door neighbor was gay. He said he was like an uncle to me. He said I loved him. He was, I called him Uncle Bob. Once again, I'm feeling like this big because I had made all kinds of assumptions about this person because of his uniform, right? And I sort of learned that you can't do that. And so now what do I do? If all heterosexuals aren't bad, right, and you don't want to devalue yourself, what are you going to do? Well, I started thinking about the fact that I needed to make a journey, not reacting to heterosexual expectations positively or negatively, but I needed to make a journey and find out who I was in this world on my own standards. And I read a quote, and I know you know the quote, and I didn't memorize it, I tried to, but it's from Walden, and Henry David Thoreau wrote this. He said, now you know that Henry David Thoreau was a wealthy 30-plus-year-old living in Concord, Massachusetts, very comfortable life, and he decided that he was going to go and build a little cabin for himself on the edge of Walden Pond. Has anyone been to Walden Pond? It's wonderful, isn't it? And then you take the stone with you and put it on the cairn, which is a pile of stones that say, I have made the journey and I support this journey that Henry David Thoreau made. If you ever get to Concord, Massachusetts, go to Walden Pond. Thoreau said, I went to the woods because I wished to live deliberately, to front only the essential facts of life and see if I could not learn what it had to teach, and not when I came to die discover that I had not lived. See, my big fear became that I was going to die and never have lived. That I was going to die, I had this fantasy that I was going to die, and I was in my deathbed, I was going to be surrounded by all the people whose expectations I had tried to meet. And that I had not spent one day of my life meeting my own. And that I didn't know what it meant to be gay, because I kept reacting to what other people thought it was to be gay. And I didn't know what it meant to be a man, because I kept trying to prove to people that I was, on their standard. And that I didn't even know what faith was because I kept trying to prove to other people that I had it. And that my relationship with myself and my God was inauthentic. And so I began a new journey. And the journey was about figuring out who I was, not in reaction to other people, not looking for any more approval. Right? Oliver North said, for instance, that if Bill Clinton is successful on lifting the ban on gays in the military, no real man will ever enlist again. Oliver North says that if you're homosexual, you're not a real man. Do I trust Oliver North? Or do you look in the mirror and say to yourself, what makes a man a man? Now, no one's going to give you any definition, Brian. Your father gave you his ideas, right? And your coach gave you his ideas, right? So what's your idea? What makes a man a man? Is it heterosexual sex? Is it being tough? Well, you know what? I had to walk that journey. And that journey included figuring out my feminine side. And I never would have been able to do that if I hadn't been gay, I decided. And if I hadn't been gay, I might not have met so many incredible transgendered people that I've met who have helped me figure out also the different elements of masculinity and femininity. And I started to think, this is a pretty interesting journey. And then when I started thinking about my relationship with Ray and realized that we've spent all these years together without the approval of anybody. We haven't gotten one anniversary card. We weren't blessed by anybody. We don't have any legal rights. We don't have anything. But we have love. Wow. And we've been together 23 years. And we love each other deeply. And it doesn't matter whether or not the Supreme Court or the state of Hawaii or the Unitarian or Episcopal or Roman Catholic or whatever. It doesn't matter what you all do. Because Ray and I love each other. And that's all that matters. And on my faith, you've got your own relationship with God, Brian. And you do not have to be debating the Bible with anybody. You're not going to win the debate, right? You can't change people's minds. They're going to believe what they want to believe. Do you have a personal relationship with God or don't you? Yeah, I do. And it feels really good. And it's through my experiences as a gay man that I experience God. And you know what? I went to First Friday services this Easter. I walked over to St. Anne's, which is a Catholic church. Now, I don't wander into Catholic churches easily. I don't. I mean, I love the church, and I love my history with the church, but I'm very cautious now about getting beaten up, you know. It's almost like coming from a dysfunctional family, and you keep going home thinking they're not going to be dysfunctional anymore, you know. And you think, oh, Lord, you know, you're romanticizing. Have you ever had that experience? But I decided I was going to go over for Good Friday services recently. And I did the Stations of the Cross. And I had the most amazing experience of identifying with the stages based upon my own journey. You know? Of having people think that you were wonderful until you said something and then they suddenly decided you needed to be crucified. I thought, wow, that hurt, didn't it? That sense of rejection. I thought, I know this not because I'm heterosexual, although I'm sure heterosexual people have their own journeys to make. I know it because of my journey as a gay person. And you know what? Maybe I have something special to offer to people because of my journey. Maybe I ought to be valued and not just tolerated. And so I have a new song that I want to offer you. It's a song I sing now. The song is, I am Brian, I am gay, I'm God's gift to you today. You don't have to accept the gift, but it's the best thing I have to offer. And it's the best thing you have to offer me. And in the ideal world, the world that we're all working towards in considering becoming an open and affirming congregation and having these conferences where all of you wonderful people come together and all of you who dared to come tonight together, even those of you who came uncomfortable, who dared to come and share and listen. The world we're creating is one, I hope, in which each of us is given the space to grow and bloom and sing the song and be able to say honestly when they meet their Creator, yes, I did, and it was beautiful. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. You know what? We have a few minutes if anyone wants to talk or reflect or respond. Do we, Neil? A couple minutes?
Yeah, we do. The way we'll handle this, we're videotaping tonight, and if anybody would like to have videotaped made available to them for showing to their friends or other people, I think we can make arrangements to do that. So the way we'll handle the questions, if you would ask me the question, I'll repeat it back for the tape, and then Brian can answer it. So
I'll respond.
Right.
Maybe not answer.
Maybe not answer it, just respond. So are there questions in the audience?
Or reflections? Don't have to be. Just here, sit and feel good if you want to.
I've had the book for several years. Read it, reread it. I'm gay. read this. It seemed to the new dawn that most people felt that there had indeed been a birth of a new person, and that tragically the old dawn was dead. The new dawn wasn't the boy they knew. He was a stranger. But the new Brian protested that he was the very same person, Brian Dawn, Didn't he still love his family? Didn't he still love his church? Didn't he still feel guilty about masturbating? The only thing new about him, he insisted, was his unwillingness to lie anymore about himself. He was gay. He had always been gay. He assured everyone, particularly himself, that beyond that he was still the same person, yet no one seemed convinced except Don.
And that's the journey you've made for yourself? Congratulations. Somebody asked me, why do you've been doing this? It'll be 25 years for me next month, which is, I have been looking forward to. I don't know what I'm going to do, but I just thought I got to do something. So what feeds you on your journey? And it's people telling stories about the flight they take. That you cross paths and you both fly higher as a result of the encounter. And so thank you for sharing that. That was great.
Anyone else with questions or comments? Yeah.
Just a quick one, Brian. You reminded me, I flew out from California to sort of be here to support my mother and the church in doing this. And of course, the theme was supposedly about other people accepting gay people like myself. And actually, it's just as much about the opposite journey you reminded me. Because when I come out here and I meet a lot of beautiful people at this church who aren't gay, but whom I relate to and find that I take great pleasure in being with, then I've made the journey back toward them. And in some ways, that's as important a journey as the one they would make toward me.
Did you all hear? And it's important for both of you. And the reality, and those of you who are also in recovery as codependent people know that we can't manage other people's journeys. We can't manage other people's lives, and that's a hard lesson to learn. All we can do is manage our expectations of other people, and we can manage our own affairs. So if someone chooses to cross the bridge to you and you choose to cross the bridge to them, and that's, the great thing about the bridge metaphor is that you cannot build a bridge from one side. You can't. You've got a large chasm. You have to meet in the middle when you build a bridge. And so that's what you find has been useful for you on your journey. That's great. Thank you.
Anyone else this evening? Yes.
Brian, the quote by Thoreau, you really rang a bell with so many people who have found a great inspiration in that passage from Walden. The rest of that paragraph describes you because it says, if I can recall the words, if life is sublime, I'll celebrate the sublime. If it is mean, then I will tell the world about it. And I think what you're doing here is you are giving us a message, not so much about gay, straight, tall, thin, short, black, white, but we are human beings who breathe and share the same air. And we need to celebrate that. Thank you for giving us some inspiration.
Thank you very much. Thanks. And if I can piggyback on that, when I do corporate training, and really the essence of my corporate training, in addition to giving facts, is to tell my story. I invite people to make their own journeys. And what I generally get from people is that I'm not gay, but I am whatever. And I know the experience of loneliness. And I didn't know that you had that same experience of being lonely. Because people don't understand what it means to be gay. Often they trivialize it because they think it's about sex. But when you tell your story, and I encourage people to tell their story, those of you who are gay, lesbian, and bisexual, the world will change when we put a face on the issue. And I know we have to do that with risk. And we have to have heterosexual people ready to catch us as we jump out. So it's a two-way street here. But it's a matter of people relating to the experience of life. And heterosexual white males have the same experience. You know, we beat up on heterosexual white males as if they're the enemy, and they aren't the enemy. They're the victims of the culture just as anybody else is, and we give them permission to not be the enemy, to say, I know your journey has been painful. You were told not to cry. No. Even at your son's funeral, you were told not to cry. So thank you for that. Anybody else?
Brian would be happy to sign books if you want to buy any, or if you brought your own. Out in the library lounge, there are refreshments out there for anyone who would like to stay around and see the art exhibit and just have a little sense of community for a little longer. Thank you very much for coming.
Mm-hmm.
Big pardon. Oh, yes.
Thank you.
And just a reminder that Brian will be giving you one more opportunity to hear his story and to hear his song tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock service right here in the sanctuary. And those of you who would like to come back, you're more than welcome to come and hear him again. Unfortunately, he has to catch a plane right after service, so there's not going to be any time for fellowship with him after that. So it'll be short and sweet, but still very meaningful. Again, thank you very much for coming. It was a good evening.